Hello and welcome to another edition of For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. Today we're going to talk about MS, and we've got the folks from the National MS Society, the Connecticut chapter, here with us today. But first up on the show, Dr. Derek Smith. He is a neurologist, and it's his first time on the show. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We'll get into the MS stuff in a second, but your specialty is being a neurologist, correct?
Correct.
What is that exactly?
So neurology is the care of people with illnesses, either of the central nervous system, the peripheral nerves, or muscles. That's kind of our purview, and that includes a lot of different things. We actually have twice as many diagnoses as the next closest specialty.
Is that right, really? Wow.
Yeah.
And MS certainly falls into that category,
It
correct?
does.
And so specifically, what is MS?
MS is an illness of unknown cause where the immune system, which normally doesn't go into the central nervous system, traffics into the central nervous system, behaves as though it's fighting an infection, and causes some collateral injury as a result. It's considered by most people to be an autoimmune disease, but it's still possible, I think, in many people's minds that it's some kind of reactivating infection in the central nervous system.
And where are we today as far as identifying that disease? Are we good at identifying it? We'll get into the treatment and...
We are much better than we used to be, thanks to a number of things. One is just growing awareness of the illness, but the other is imaging, magnetic resonance imaging, MRI. You hear a lot about it in sports as well, but in neurology, it's given us a much better window into especially the brain and what's going on there. So we can detect it earlier, we can follow it more clearly, and figure out who's doing well and who isn't using MRI.
Different people react differently to the disease. Let's talk about like the symptoms first of all. If someone suspects they have it, or maybe they go in not knowing exactly what's wrong and then they get diagnosed with it.
Yeah, so that's typically the case. It's more common in women, as many autoimmune diseases are. So the typical case is a young woman who's had some unusual symptoms, maybe related to vision or some tingling, something like that, and nobody's really sure what's going on. And a lot of the diagnosis is just going through the different things the nervous system does and the different symptoms the person may have had, and identifying ones that may be consistent with an MS symptom. And then we do the diagnostic studies, which usually early on includes MRI.
Is it a thing of genetics? Is it the environment? Is it your lifestyle? Tell me about what causes MS.
So there's been a lot of research into all of those things. In terms of genetics, we have identified the most important genes that lead to an increased risk of MS. And so there is a genetic influence. But even if you put all of those genes into one person, they still probably wouldn't get MS. So it's really just an influence. In identical twins, if one twin gets MS 2 out of 3 times, the other one won't. So if it was a strongly genetic disease, then it would be 100% of the time. So it's what I would call a weakly genetic disease.
I find it fascinating when we talk about identifying the gene. It's key and it's important, but once you identify it, is that the key to then begin to work on, what do you do once you identify it? Can you manipulate it? I mean, is that the key to maybe eventually a cure?
So for a lot of the genes, we don't directly manipulate the genes themselves, but there are drugs which are known to affect what I would call the gene product, which very often is a protein. And for the genes that have been identified in MS, those are proteins. And for a lot of those genes, we already had therapies, even in trials, that targeted those protein gene products. So that it's in this case, it was really a confirmation that we were on the right track.
It's a starting point for you, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there are also very strong environmental influences. So what's been described for several decades now is a strong latitude effect. And that was first done in the VA system here in this country. And it showed that people who lived and grew up further away from the equator had a higher risk of MS. So for example, a woman in New England has about a 1 in 500 chance of getting MS, which is pretty high.
What is it about the equator? Is it the electromagnetic field or the
Well,
Earth?
it's
or
probably UV radiation.
Okay.
And UV radiation does two things. One, it has a direct effect on the immune system. And two, it's involved in vitamin D production. And there was some research done in Boston over a decade ago that showed that women with lower vitamin D levels were at higher risk for developing MS, part of the Nurses' Health Study.
It sounds to me like that's something where if early on in your life you can determine whether, what your vitamin intake is and what your levels are, and you can rectify that, can't you?
So there's been a lot of interest in doing studies with vitamin D to see if giving vitamin D, for example, would lower the risk of MS. So that research still has to be done, but I suspect you're right.
I think I'm a doctor. I think I'm on my way here. But you know what? You do a great job of explaining it in a layperson's terms so they can understand it. So those are all things, environment, genetics. Okay, so you're diagnosed with MS. What do you do then? You go in, you get treatment. What can be done these days? And I would imagine, I don't know how long you've been a neurologist, but I would imagine that over the course of time, progress, research, development, treatment has gotten much better, correct?
So when I finished my neurology residency, which is the training program for neurology, MS patients were put into resident clinics. So I saw a lot of MS patients as a resident. And there was really nothing that we could do for them that would really alter the course of their disease at that point in time. I said, we've got to help these people. These were young people whose lives were falling apart because of MS.
And you feel helpless when there's nothing you can do.
Absolutely. The great news is that in that short period of time, I'm old, but I'm not that old, in the last 20 years, there have been now close to 10 new therapies approved for MS. And not only are they new, they're getting better, they're getting more tolerable and more effective. So it's a very different illness now than it was 2 decades ago.
Can they? Are they discovering the symptoms earlier now? Are you able to detect it earlier now, and therefore be able to begin treatment earlier?
Absolutely, and part of that is the awareness. Mm-hmm. And it used to be that the only MS patients you would hear about were the ones that had had a terrible course and a lot of problems. Yeah. And so there was a lot of fear about it. And I think as more people have come out and said, yes, I have MS, we understand that it's really a whole spectrum of problems that people can have, some of them not so severe. And what's really helped us with early diagnosis is, as we were discussing, the MRI scan.
Can you go for a while and not even realize that you have MS if the symptoms are not severe?
Absolutely. There's some old post-mortem series, so sort of CSI kind of stuff, where they would examine just a whole series of patients in hospitals where the diagnosis of MS was coming up in higher numbers than I already mentioned.
Okay. You mentioned that it's more prevalent in women than with men. How about children? Is it detected in children?
It's rare in children.
Okay.
There is a lot of interest in identifying children with MS and doing research on their immune systems because they're more naive, and we think we may get closer to what the original instigating agent is.
So, it's been a while, and, you've seen amazing advancement in treatment. Can a person live a more normal life longer these days because of it?
There is some data from the first study that was done with one of the interferons suggesting that the mortality rate is actually improved by early treatment with disease-modifying agents. Having said that, MS isn't something that normally shortens lifespan by that much. It's more disabling than it is, a mortal disease.
Can you, and you're the best person to ask this because you study it, can you see a future where there could be an elimination of MS? I mean, you're talking about trying to affect the immune system to be able to attack MS, right?
Yeah, so as far as we've come with MS, it is still the case that we don't know exactly what causes it. It may be a slightly different illness in just about everybody who gets it. You're talking about the two most complex systems in the body, the immune system and the nervous system. They both function heavily dependent on their own memory. And so really teasing apart exactly what's going on is quite a complicated task. It would be nice if we could cure it, but I think that I'm happy enough as it is with being able to control it in just about everybody who gets the diagnosis.
But just to see progress being made in general, right?
Yeah, no, it's so much better now than it was when I started.
Is it a disease that can be misdiagnosed if you're not looking for it specifically or looking for something else?
Still to this day, most people with MS will tell you that they were told that it might have been something else before the MS diagnosis was arrived upon. So because the symptoms are so variable, it frequently does mimic other illnesses early on.
Good stuff. Learned a lot in there. And again, a layperson can understand it. But we're going to get a lot more into it. We'll take a break. Dr. Derek Smith, who's a neurologist, thanks for being on the show. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you again.
We'll take a break and come back. I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. Stay with us.
Swimming introduces kids to the benefits of a healthy lifestyle, and a healthy kid is a confident kid.
Welcome back to For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. We are chatting with the folks from the Connecticut chapter of the MS Society, multiple sclerosis. I want to make sure I mention that, but we'll get into that a little more. Kate Moore is a Connecticut chapter staff member, a volunteer, and it's also her first time on the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Is that a good title for you? I mean, you're a staff member, you're a volunteer, but you're sort of a coordinator too?
Yeah, I actually coordinate the volunteers.
Okay.
So I'm
You're in charge of the volunteers.
Yeah.
All right. How long have you been involved with the organization?
about a year and a half.
How'd you get involved in the first place?
I've always worked in the nonprofits, and I really enjoy working for a cause. And so what ended up happening, this job opened up. It was a little bit of a newer position, and it had exactly what I wanted. Just working with people, getting out there, working with a cause that involved kind of being out in the field. So that's how.
A lot of people will get involved with a cause because sometimes there's a personal interest for them. Maybe a family member or a friend is involved, and that's how they kind of get into it. That wasn't the case with you, though, right?
Not necessarily. I do happen to know people with MS, but it wasn't. It was more the job itself. The nice thing about working at the MS Society, even if you didn't know anybody who had multiple sclerosis, you immediately get engrossed and involved, and you meet so many people who are affected by it that it touches you immediately.
And if you're a good person, if you're a person with a heart and a soul, how could you not? How could you not?
It's very true.
Connect emotionally with people that have it, and they're there so that they can kind of reach out and help other people and get help themselves too, right?
Exactly, and it's an organization that has so many constituents, clients, families who are very hands-on, and so you're working directly with people on a daily basis, which is very nice.
And it's also a bonding opportunity for people who need like emotional support.
Exactly.
It's other people, like-minded people that are there for you, right?
Yep, exactly.
So you are in charge of the volunteers, and the reason that there are volunteers is there is so much going on with the MS Society as far as fundraising, walks, runs, bike events, but also just events about getting the word out. Now, granted, all these events are about getting the word out too, but I mean, it's all of that, right?
Exactly. You really can get involved on many different levels. Some of the big things we have, our Walk MS is is our biggest event. That was held this past April, and we had 12 sites across the state on one weekend. And then coming up, we have 2 bike tours, and they'll be happening in the beginning of June. one is in Windsor, and one is in Westport. So it's kind of nice because we get a combination of people who come out to join in the actual activity, whether it be walking or cycling, and then we have a whole other host of people who come just to come out and help out,
Right.
and just to volunteer.
Volunteer in any way they can. Maybe
Exactly.
they can't participate in the actual of biking event itself, but they can be there for moral support. Maybe
Yep.
they can be there as a sort of a financial donor or just
Yep.
volunteer. And I know you're always looking for volunteers for many different aspects, right?
Exactly.
Like what kind of things can volunteers do if they wanted to get involved?
So we do have the events, as I said, and at each event we have specific volunteer jobs, whether it's checking walkers or cyclists in. For the bike event coming up, we have different rest stops along the route for the cyclists to stop and hydrate and get some food. So we have volunteers who work those. And then we have stuff such as office volunteers. It gets very busy. We're a nonprofit. We don't have huge staff. It gets really busy before an event. People come in the office, help us with mailings, phone calls, whatever we might need. And then we also go so far as to work, we have an ambassador program, and that's different clients, different folks with MS who come out, and it's sort of an elite group of volunteers we have that go to different health fairs. They speak on our behalf.
Are they celebrities or, you know?
In our world, they
Yeah,
are.
yeah, absolutely.
But then we also have our advocacy, which are the volunteers who come out and work in the state capitol. They help out at a national level, just with the legislator and different things like that.
Now, we heard from the doctor in the first segment, and we really got into the medical jargon, if you will. As a person who's not a doctor, but is heavily involved in a lot of the community events that are going on with MS, with how much have you learned as a layperson and not a doctor about multiple sclerosis?
A ton. I came into it, like I said, I knew people who had MS. There's so much more to it. And because, like Dr. Smith said, so many people are affected so differently, you literally are learning something new every day. So not only is research advancing, our medicine's advancing, but just by dealing with all different people and the different situations that they come across, you learn more and more each day about it and how it, whether it's physical effects or even emotionally affects people or emotionally affects families. And like I said, we go out to different companies and health fairs. We do lunch and learns at companies. And just the different people we connect and come across there, it's great.
You know, and the other thing is what the doctor said, because I asked him and I wanted to get an answer to the question, do you see progress being made? And you see all the research and the progress being made. As long as it's moving in the right direction,
Yeah.
that gives you hope, and that makes you want to keep going out, and the other people that are involved with it, it's like that's what you're there for, you know?
And you know what, the other thing that really gives you hope is the amount of people who are looking to support us, whether, like I said, whether it's financially, volunteering. It is so impressive to me how many people we have come out, whether it be the one weekend on walk, throughout the entire year at any of our events. We have such a strong outside support system that it's fantastic. We are very, very fortunate for that.
You know, and we were talking off the air about how such a brutal winter we had here. People were almost looking for a reason to just get out and do something. They would have. They're very enthusiastic about being involved with a lot of the events that you do anyway. But just get me out of the house.
Yeah.
Get me out of this cold weather now that it's nice now. And this is the perfect time. You just had the event in April you talked about.
Yep.
This is the perfect time to really start getting rolling, get people out, and get
Exactly.
people involved. Maybe people that haven't been involved before will join in.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. And that's what, with our bike events coming up in June. And then we have another cardio express ride in the fall, as well as a 5K in the fall. So we have a little bit of everything for everyone. We've got family events. Cycling events are geared more towards, those who enjoy the sport. But we really do offer a lot for people. And our venues are great, too.
I like how the events, like, for example, the walk, there are so many around the state. You don't have to drive far. You just
Exactly.
go to the one that's closest to you and participate in it. It all is for the good cause. So if you're in southeastern Connecticut, you don't have to drive to Hartford or New Haven or vice versa. They're all over the place, right?
Yeah, and that's a nice thing. Our main office is located in Hartford, but we cover the entire state, and we do our best to have events that cover the entire state.
Well, let's get into it with a little more specifically. April has already passed, obviously,
Yes.
so the next big events in June are the bike events, right?
Correct,
All
yeah.
right, so let's talk about that.
Okay, so Sunday, June 1st, is our Windsor ride, and that's held at Griffin Land in Windsor, Connecticut. And then June 8th, the following Sunday, we are down at Sherwood Island in Westport.
All right, so you got one up north and one on the shoreline.
Exactly, so we're trying to spread out.
Convenient. So now, what does the event consist of?
For the cyclist, each event will have a 10-mile, 25-mile, 50, and 100-mile rides.
Wow.
Yeah, the 100 I don't think I could even, I can't even think
I'm
about.
not sure if I could even drive it, to be honest with you.
And so each ride has those choices. We also have the Windsor has a 2-mile ride, and the Westport has a kiddie ride. So it's a family event. Should the kids want to come out and join in, there are rides for them as well. And like I said, there are rest stops along the route. We've got.
It's not a race per se,
No,
right?
it's a ride.
All right.
It is a ride.
Yeah, we should emphasize
yeah,
that, you know.
I
Some people
tell-
take it very seriously, though.
Well,
you
and
know?
I tell people all the time, my sister helps out a lot, and she's like, oh, I'm coming to the race. I'm like, it's a ride.
Yeah.
Like, you have to remember it's a ride. And it is. It's just out there to support the cause, enjoy the day. The routes are beautiful. People love the routes. So it's a really nice day to get out there, do what you love, and support a great cause.
Get some exercise,
Exactly.
support a great cause.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's a family event, like
It
you
is.
said. Is it a rain or shine event?
It's rain or shine, yep. And both events, we have some music there. We've got barbecue lunches. So there's stuff going on as well besides just the ride, which is nice.
And I would imagine right up until the last minute, you're available in case that somebody wants to get involved.
Yeah.
Whether it be in the race,
Yep.
in the ride
Thank you.
itself, or just in some kind of volunteer capacity.
Exactly. You can
correct?
show up that morning, definitely to sign on to ride. And then as far as volunteering, we're always
What are you
looking
looking
for
for
help.
right now?
Right now, we could use some help with. At the finish line, we hand out medals to each cyclist that come in. We still have a couple rest stops that we're looking to have people man.
yeah.
Exactly. So some stuff like that, some on-site stuff as well as a few things on the route.
So on the website, can people go through the website if they want and learn more about volunteering if they
Yes.
want to
Yep.
too? Okay.
ctfightsms.org will have everything you're looking for.
All right, so that's the bike events. What's after that?
After that, we get a little bit of a summer break.
Right. Too
and
hot
then-
in the dead of summer.
Exactly. And then coming up again, we actually have another bike ride in Hartford in the fall. That'll be the weekend of whatever the Saturday is, 13th
Okay.
to 14th.
All right.
And then we have a 5K that's a Halloween-themed 5K that'll be happening in October.
And again, the 5K isn't, you can kind of run at your own pace, right?
Exactly. Although it's a race, that one is not same thing. We have some
We're
folks
allowed
come
to
out and
call
walk.
that a race, though.
We have some folks who could just come out and walk. Whatever works for you.
Now, in the actual walks themselves, because
Mm-hmm.
they're all over the state, is it a baby stroller event? Can you bring those? Maybe can you bring the dog and walk with them too?
Yep.
Or, you know?
All our events are actually handicap accessible. Specifically, the walks
Right.
are all.
a lot
but
more
yeah,
people can participate.
Exactly,
in that.
and they are. You can come down with family, kids, pets.
And another thing we were talking about off the air, as far as money raised, you're pretty close to already to what your goal is, and we have confidence that you're going to surpass that this year, right?
Yes. Yep. We are at about 1.2 million right now for walk, and we are looking for 1.3. But fundraising still happening right now, so we are hopeful that we will reach that goal.
In the summer, you take a little break from those events just because it's too hot. What happens in the winter? Are there indoor things that are going on? There
We
are.
actually
okay.
we do a lot of things here
All year round,
Yeah,
really,
we really
yeah.
do, and we have we call it WHAMs. It's Women Against MS luncheons. We have one in Fairfield that just happened, and we have one in Hartford that'll happen in fall, winter. And we have our Dinner of Champions, which is a big gala that we hold. That also happens in November. We have a golf tournament that just happened this past May. So we have a variety of events. If
Yeah.
you're not interested in necessarily doing a walk or bike, definitely check the website out. We have a lot of things going on.
There's something for everyone.
There
There
really is.
And I know
yeah.
you guys are heavily involved with social media too. So if you go to the website, you'll be able to click on the links for Facebook and Twitter and
Correct.
YouTube and all that.
Yep.
By the way, this show is on YouTube. Maybe you're watching it on TV. Maybe you're watching it on YouTube. But that's available, and you guys will have the YouTube show up too. So there's a lot going on.
There is.
As it stands right now, as we're taping this right now, what is it that you're working on right now? Is it those bike events?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Really?
I mean, those are
Like what needs to
2
be
weeks
firmed
away.
up still?
I have to do. As far as me,
You almost wanted to go,
yeah.
oh my
do you
goodness.
want to ask?
Yeah.
Just confirmation stuff, checking with the volunteers, making sure they're all set. We've got my other coworkers checking with all the cyclists, make sure they have their information, they're signed up. Some folks do teams.
Yeah,
and
I was going to
so,
ask you
yeah.
about that. With walks and really
Yep.
all the events, can you form a team?
Definitely.
Yep.
And
okay.
we have everything from family teams to corporate teams.
And one other thing you mentioned was like sometimes people like to sort of do it themselves, do their own
Yeah.
event, and
Yep.
then you're sort of a liaison
I
for
am.
that. Talk about that a
I
little
am.
bit.
So we call it, like you said, our do-it-yourself DIY events, and it's basically third-party events, and it's people who want to go out on their own, whether they host a wine tasting, beer tasting, a party. People do their own golf tournaments, and we're the benefactor of that.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it's
Give
great.
people the website one more time so they can go and learn all this and more.
Sure. It is ctfightsms.org.
And Kate Moore has been our guest. We're going to take one more break and come back. I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. Stay with us. So that is our show for today. I am Sean Murphy. You can see this show and many others on our YouTube sites. We will see you next time. Take care.